everyone. How are you? It is certainly a pleasure and a joy to see you all here tonight. We want to thank you for coming to our event. My name is Glenn Hagenbach. I'm the president of PTA, Project Teach America. It's a newly formed organization that's dedicated to teaching the founding principles of the country. It is my pleasure to be your MC tonight. First, some housekeeping issues. In your programs, you'll see a blue card. This is a survey form. It's needed for planning future events. It's also part of a continuous improvement program, so we can keep these programs relevant to your interests. We ask that at the end of the program, if you would please take a moment, fill out the cards, and give it to one of the volunteers wearing one of these tags. As far as questions and answers, we have only one microphone, so we're going to ask that you write your questions on a card. At the end of each speaker's presentation, our volunteers will come down the side of the aisles and collect the cards. There are index cards on the back of this little table behind us, and also there's pencils there. This way, we can make sure that everyone can hear the question as well as the answer. Now, to get the program started, I would like to set the tone for the Faith and Liberty series by taking you back to the very first day of the first meeting of the First Continental Congress in 1774. At that time, our country, or what there was of it, was nothing more than a fragmented collection of diverse regions with divergent commercial interests and very different ways of life. We had a multitude of ethnic and national groups, and as for religions, we had the Episcopalians, the Quakers, the Anabaptists, Presbyterians, Congregationalists, Catholic communities, and Jewish communities, just to name a few. And while today we may consider many of these denominations, they were considered religions of their own right back in the day. And of course, with everything going on between the colonies and Mother England, everyone was polarized by the politics of the day. So the delegates attending the First Continental Congress reflected this diversity. They did not agree on anything. They didn't even agree that we should have a country, let alone what the future direction of that country should be. They had little in common. They didn't trust each other. And the truth be told, in some cases they didn't even like each other. So you can imagine in this environment, when Samuel Adams, as the first order of business in that first day of the First Continental Congress, stood up and made a motion that they should start each session with prayer. The record shows that it was met with immediate opposition, which is a polite way of saying it almost caused a fist fight. Because, not that they opposed prayer, you understand, but they couldn't agree on what religion should have the authority to do this. The conversation got very heated, and finally, Samuel Adams stands up, and he says, and I quote, "Gentlemen, I am no bigot, and I can hear a prayer from any gentleman of piety and virtue who was at the same time a friend to his country." With this, they calmed down. But the logjam wasn't really broken until Samuel Adams, a Puritan, looked at an Episcopalian reverend named Jacob Boucher, and he asked if the good reverend would lead the prayer the next morning. So the next morning, Reverend Boucher started by reading several prayers from the standard book of prayer of the day. Then he read from the Old Testament, Psalm 35, which happens to start with, "Contend, O Lord, with those who contend with me." Then he did something very unusual for those times. He launched into an unscripted prayer. His prayer started with, and I quote, "Be thou present, O God of wisdom, and direct the counsel of this honorable assembly. Enable them to settle all things on the best and surest of foundation, and that the scene of blood may speedily be closed, that order, harmony, and peace may be effectually restored, and that truth and justice and religion and piety prevail and flourish among the people." The effect on the representatives was profound, because in spite of their differences, in spite of their prejudices, in spite of their mistrust of one another, they discovered that, in fact, they did share a common set of fundamental principles and beliefs that originated from deep within the Judeo-Christian teachings of their faith. These principles are what brought them together. These principles united this diverse group and led them against all odds to establish the most exceptional and successful nation in the history of mankind. These principles helped create that document. These are the foundation of our country. These principles are the cornerstone of our laws, and they shape the character of our nation. So at this time, I would like everyone to reflect a little bit on the faith of our founding fathers. I'd also like the Honor Guard, or Boy Scout Troop 40, to present the colors. So let us all rise as we approach the flag.
Color guard, attention. Color guard, forward, march. Color guard, pose the colors.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Color guard, about face. Color guard, forward, march. Color guard, at ease.
Let's show our appreciation to the fine Boy Scouts. I was asked to make one more announcement one of courtesy and one of necessity. We asked that all cell phones be turned off, which means we can now go back to on that. And the necessities are out this door and across the way. The bathrooms are over there. It should be. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce our host for this evening, Monsignor Louis Broom, the pastor of Holy Spirit Parish, who is gracious enough to provide this facility for this event this evening. He will officially welcome you and lead us in the invocation. Monsignor.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's tremendous spirit of gratitude to see all of you here. You know, we have been praying for water and raining, and it comes today, the Lord's Day. And as I was driving here, I felt, well, we may have just a few people. Some people may try to go out their homes and saw the rain and went back and their comfortability. But you are here. This is super. When I saw the gentleman, the offering more chairs, it's a tremendous sign. And I welcome you truly to our parish hall here and our premise of the Holy Spirit community. Are open to everyone, and whatever community you come from, whatever town, whatever background, whatever culture, we are the people of God, and we all are brothers and sisters today, always. So we are really, truly God's people. So I warmly welcome you to be with us. During the time, we have some ingredients that it's promised if you here today, there's no calories because it was made with great love and care by Brad Smith in McAllen and their great generosity. Have some with a variety. Please help yourself. And we have good coffee and water and whatever way we can. We have a number of ushers around. They have a variety if you need anything. So make it this a very productive evening. I am most grateful to our distinguished speakers. Couldn't be more grateful for Dr. Gilbert to be on our list again. As many of you know him in many other ways, but at least through the radio for NSS Hospital. And most grateful for Pastor Dr. Smith that came here for this series, and immediately we began that interchange of communication. And it seems like I know him now for a long time, and I've been just a short time. You know, and when we talk about God, this was meant. I want to thank him for taking the time and promoting for all of us to be here today. I believe many of you have heard that wonderful advertisement in the radio, and really very, very excited. Thank you, Dr. Smith, in promoting this wonderful series on our faith and liberty. And I want to thank our distinguished from McAllen. Met him some time ago in a different area activities with our city. We are really only grateful for his presence, and he will assist today our Rabbi McAllen. Rosenberg, a truly great show. And in this, I ask you to remain seated, but to open your hearts and minds to the presence of our God. The Lord is our leader. He is our shepherd. Almighty God, we lift our hearts and minds in the true meaning of gratitude for the many blessings and goodness you bestow upon us, for the goodness of life, for that gift most precious that each one of us are here present day continue to live in its fullness. We thank you for our founding fathers. We thank you for our great nation, for all the good things we continue to accomplish in our nation, for the glory and honor of your name, for the good of our people, and for the help and need of others. We humble ourselves, always ask your forgiveness for those other moments of darkness in our nation, in our world. In the violation of life, violation of our principles, and the violation of the most precious gift, the gift of life. Today, we ask that you inspire through our distinguished speakers, that opening our hearts and minds, we feel your presence, your grace, your guidance. So we thank you for yesterday. We truly thank you for today, for this great opportunity of our gathering. And we ask you to come to open our hearts for a promising and a better tomorrow. Amen. Amen.
Thank you, Monsignor. first speaker tonight is Dr. Lawrence Gilman. Dr. Gilman is a former hospital CEO and a practicing anesthesiologist. But take it from someone who has had the privilege of listening to him speak several times, he will not be putting you to sleep tonight. He is also the host of the weekly Talk Back program on KURV 710 AM radio. He is much sought after to speak on topics such as the Affordable Health Care Act, the sanctity of life, as well as the Constitution and the decisions of the Supreme Court. It is indeed my privilege to present to you Dr. Lawrence Gilman, who will be speaking on the Constitution and the erosion of liberty.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you all for being here on this nice rainy day, which we needed. So we start things off clearly. We live in a fascist tyranny. If you don't believe that, then you don't know what a fascist tyranny is. And we have just experienced the disgusting display of the President of the United States paying homage to an organization that proudly has amassed, in their own words, they're proud of having slaughtered 350,000 defenseless infants in the last year, for which our federal government paid them $500 million. Now, I know that the law says you're not supposed to, the federal government is not supposed to cover the killing of the undelivered infant, which is what abortion is, killing of the undelivered infant. But they get around that through legalisms. The only money that Planned Parenthood gets is from the federal government, from donations, if you can believe that, and from corporations and private donations. They receive almost nothing from the private sector whatsoever, as far as you or I. It just comes from big corporations and from those who believe that abortion is good. Now, what's interesting about that is that Planned Parenthood is an organization that was founded by a fascist with Nazi leanings, Margaret Sanger. Today it is defended by the ACLU, which is an organization founded by Stalinists, Roger Baldwin, who was a member of the Communist Party, and William Foster, who was the head of the American Communist Party at the time. Those are the founders of the American Civil Liberties Union. And it may seem odd to see that you have this Nazi fascists and Stalinist communists both supporting Planned Parenthood, because we're taught in school, well, that communists are on one side and fascists are on the other. But that is not true. They're both on the same side. The two sides are those who believe in state control, communism, fascism, and those who believe in individual liberty, freedom, and independence. What does the Constitution say? We the people. It doesn't say I the king. It doesn't say we the government. It doesn't say the aristocracy. It says we the people in order to form a more perfect union. So who owns the government? We the people. That's the way it's supposed to be. Is that the way it is? Well, of course not. We are completely disenfranchised. We have no say as to the way the government functions. It is basically a group of elitists that believe themselves superior to the rest of us and think that they have the right, duty, and obligation to dictate to us how we should live our lives. And that comes from their belief in superiority of one group over another. That is the basis of communism and fascism is nothing more than the outgrowth of the old rules of aristocracy, of the divine right of kings. That is nothing different than that. What is the Constitution? The Constitution was created by the American population that had won the Revolutionary War. The Revolutionary War began in April of 1775, more than a year before the reading of the Declaration of Independence. The conflict originated when the American colonists were informed that the British were coming to confiscate not our money, not our land, not taxation without representation. That isn't why the United States, the colonists, went to war. They went to war because the British were coming to confiscate the weapons and munitions that the Americans had. And in order to prevent the British from doing that, the Battle of Lexington and Concord, the famous battle fought by the Minutemen, was held, and which they beat the British, by the way. And that was the beginning of the Revolutionary War. Many of the important battles were fought before July of 1776. The Declaration of Independence was created by certain individuals, primarily Thomas Jefferson, espousing a certain philosophy. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That governments exist at the sufferance of the people, and that when governments go beyond what they're supposed to be doing, they are supposed to be deposed, and that was the Declaration of Independence. The Constitution was created to set up a structure of governance that would allow the people to be free of government domination, therefore we the people. But the proclivities of politicians do not change because of written documents. If our forefathers had thought that we were going to be a different kind of people, a different kind of politician on the American continent, that we were going to have angels that were in charge of the government, they would not have needed a Constitution. The Constitution was created because the Founding Fathers knew very well the evils that man can produce. They knew very well that another George III, another person could become George III. Europe was run by aristocracies well into the 20th century, and even today, one might say. And so they set up the documents specifically to prevent that from occurring. The document is short. It delineates the authority of different branches of government. It sets up a system of checks and balances. It denies any implied powers to the federal government. Everything the government does today is unconstitutional. They have no right to tax your income by the Constitution. They have no right to set up programs like Medicaid and Medicare. There is no right to public education. There certainly is no right to abortion on demand. Yet every one of these actions is not part of our daily lives, even though they are all completely unconstitutional. Now, you might say, well, they have these amendments. Well, we have these Supreme Court decisions. That is completely irrelevant. The Constitution is the Constitution. If the Constitution could be changed at the will of the Congress, then there's no point in having a Constitution, because the Founding Fathers realized that at any future date, a Congress of gangsters could change the Constitution and legalize what was illegal and make legal what is not legitimate. And so the Constitution cannot be changed. And just because you pass an amendment, that doesn't make it constitutional. When the Constitution says you cannot tax the people directly, That wasn't put in there as a happenstance, as a temporary measure. That was meant to be, and that's mentioned more than once. A direct tax is not allowed. So you pass an amendment that says there, and then that there you can do that, and simply by passing an amendment, well, we did it through the legal system, but legality does not confer legitimacy nor constitutionality. And so the country has been hijacked by gangsters. And that's not at all unusual. It has happened in many other countries before. The proclivities of the politician does not change, and they are the same regardless of the color of their skin, the language that they speak, or the religion they profess. It is simply a belief that some people are born to rule others. And the Constitution was supposed to stop that, but in order for the politicians to do what they wanted to do, they had to subvert the Constitution. So the Constitution is completely destroyed. There isn't a fragment of it left. There's not a single right that has been preserved, but there have been many so-called rights which have been imposed upon us, which amazingly enough enslave us. Now, the Supreme Court is made up of men and women that are human beings. They have a political orientation. That's why you have 5-4 decisions. If it was up to the country, you cannot have a 5-4 decision if it's based on the Constitution, because the Constitution is very clear. And so therefore, something is amiss. You think of it logically. If all the justices on the Supreme Court, and by the way, the number 9 is not a fixed number. I believe the first number was 5, and they've had 6 and 10, and Franklin Roosevelt wanted to increase it to 15. Now, the interesting part about that, or two interesting parts, is that the Supreme Court was never meant to, there was no fixed number. But the important thing is that there was no stipulation for an uneven number, which would be necessary to break a tie. Because it never occurred to the founding fathers that the laws of the United States or the Constitution of the United States would be dependent upon the Supreme Court decision. It never occurred to them. It wasn't what the Supreme Court was supposed to do. There's an order of things that are created in checks and balances, and it's a linear order going from the Congress to the executive branch to the judiciary. It is a linear order. It doesn't reverse itself. In other words, the judiciary cannot impose its will on legislation. And so, what the judiciary, so if you think about it, if we assume that every justice is an expert in the Constitution, obviously, why else would they be on the Supreme Court? Then something is amiss for every decision that's not 9-0. Because that would mean that if you have a 5-4 decision, and it's amazing how the country pivots on these decisions based upon the political appointee. Obviously, that could never have been the case. So you have a 5-4 decision. What does that mean? Well, that means that either 5 or 4 don't know what you're talking about, because it's the Constitution, and it can only be one way. And so the way it should be is that no decision based on the Constitution should be anything other than unanimous. So in a 5-4 decision, there are two things that need to be done. One, the decision is invalid, and 2, the 4 or 5 who don't know anything about the Constitution need to be thrown off the court. And that's the way it ought to function. It was never meant to function the way it does today. The Supreme Court has no power in the Constitution to interpret the Constitution. It assumed that power in a decision in 1803. But that makes about as much sense as saying, as an employee of a company, that I determine my own salary. The Supreme Court came to a decision, and they said they own the Constitution. Who says so? The Supreme Court. How is that valid? You might ask, why did the executive branch and the Congress allow that? Well, you have to realize they're all on the same team. And so therefore, if you allow 9 unelected or 6 or 10 or whatever the number is, unelected members of the court to decide what the Constitution means, that absolves the president and the senators and representatives that have to face election periodically. So they're absolved of that. They're perfectly willing to allow the Supreme Court to take the interpretive power of the Constitution. But then again, the Supreme Court pays back in kind the executive order. The term executive order does not exist in the Constitution. Executive power. Well, what is the executive power? The executive power is the execution of the laws passed by the legislature, signed by the president. That's all executive power is, to enforce the law. That's all it does. There's no such thing as executive order. However, we have executive orders which locked up 200,000 Japanese in World War II. We have executive orders which have launched wars in Asia and other places, in which the president, on his own cognizance, is able to launch the country into a war. Do you think that our founding fathers ever contemplated that situation? Never. Yet, why is the president allowed to do that? Because the Supreme Court says the president is allowed to do that. So you have one hand washing the other. I'm going to read a decision, very short, not just a couple of pertinent points from Supreme Court decisions. The question before us is whether the class of persons described are constituent members of this sovereignty. We think they are not, and that they are not included and were not intended to be included under the word citizens in the Constitution, and can therefore claim none of the rights and privileges which that instrument provides for and secures to citizens of the United States. All this together persuades us that the word person, as used in this amendment, does not include the unborn. In short, the unborn have never been recognized in the law as persons in the whole sense. That actually came from 2 separate decisions more than 100 years apart, but they sound pretty much the same, don't they? The first decision is the Dred Scott decision, in which the Supreme Court said slavery is legal. That's what the Supreme Court said, twisting the meanings of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Yes, technically, the black slave was not a citizen because he and she were denied citizenship, so they were not citizens. But the right or the power, the authority of naturalization is in the hands of the federal government. All that needed to be done was to naturalize the slaves, and therefore they would then have the rights of all citizens. But they didn't elect to do that because of political considerations. Clearly, when the Declaration of Independence says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, there's nothing there that says, except for black people. That's not in there. The second part was from another decision. I didn't separate them, but I think you know what it is, because they're so similar. And the second decision is from the Roe v. Wade decision, which says that you could murder an undelivered infant because the infant is not a person, which I think would surprise many mothers in this room. That the infant is not a person. When you're carrying your baby in the womb, I really doubt if in your mind, I wonder if this is a person or if it's something else. But these are Supreme Court decisions. 100 years apart, not the same Supreme Court, many years distance from each other. And the interesting thing is, the public perception of those which supported slavery is superficially completely opposite of those who support Roe v. Wade. But if you look beneath the surface, what do we find? That under the skin, they're the same. Because they all believe in government control. Under the skin, underneath the surface, they are all the same. And so, when you have a conversation with those who are not on our side on these issues, it's good to realize or should understand that you can relate to them that those who support Roe v. Wade and abortion on demand are using the same language that was used to justify slavery. And see how they answer that assertion. The reason they are the same is because they have the same mentality that government should be in control of your life and that government dictates. Now, the question we might ask is, or we ought to ask, is why does the government really care if a woman has an abortion or not? Why should the government care, or why should there be a Roe v. Wade decision? Now, of course, there's no justification for a Roe v. Wade decision. There's nothing in the Constitution that allows the Supreme Court to make such a decision. It's completely unconstitutional. But the question arises why the government cares. I mean, why would they care one way or the other? And the reason is there's more to this than meets the eye. It is not a question of the abortion of the in utero infant. That is not the issue. The issue is who's in charge? The people or the government? That's the key. Who promotes the murder of the in utero infant on demand? It's not poor people. It's rich people. It's Hillary Clinton. It's Bill Clinton. It's Barack Obama. It's Mrs. George Bush, whatever her name is. If you wonder why George Bush was such an ineffective president, look at what he married. And so, when you look at it, you say, well, you never see poor people on TV talking about the right to murder their children. The poor people suffer from it. Who are the targets? The poor. Who was Margaret Sanger targeted? Blacks, Hispanics, Jews, and the poor. It's interesting. Why? Because it is the poor who suffer from that in all countries, and in our country alone as well. Why? Because the government wants to eliminate as many poor as they can, because they're a burden on the state. And so, what I find somewhat peculiar is that the organization Planned Parenthood, that originally was named the American Birth Control League, the name was changed in 1943 because of the close association that Planned Parenthood had with the Nazi Party. Lothar Stoddard, who founded, Harvard graduate, no surprise. Lothar Stoddard founded, with Margaret Sanger, the American Birth Control League, went to Nazi Germany in 1940 and said they got it right. They're taking care of their Jewish problem. That's what needs to be done in the United States. Those are the founders of Planned Parenthood. Now, I find it somewhat humorous in a kind of tragic situation that Lothar Stoddard did have a bone to pick with Himmler and others that he met in Germany. Because Himmler said that, and I'm going to get this mixed up, but essentially the English and the Germans come from different ancestral roots. And the English, Walter Stoddard, the Westerners, the Anglo-Saxons, they figured they were the top of the world, that they were the ones who were the elite. And the Germans said, no way, the Nordics are. Okay, so there was their conflict. Not that there wasn't an elite, there was a question which group is above the other. So that was the source of conflict. But they both agreed that blacks, Jews, Hispanics, and the poor needed to be eliminated. On that, they were in agreement. And so that's the source of what our government comes from. That is the source of the way politicians think. The elite. It is the elite that destroys the Constitution. No Supreme Court justice is a poor person. They're all elite. Now, I will have to admit they do have diversity. Not all 9 are from Harvard, only 7. 2 are from Yale. So we have to hand it to them that, yes, they do have diversity. Of course, those schools are 100 miles apart in the Northeast coast. I'm not sure how well they represent us here in Texas or in the middle of the United States. We have to understand everything in its depth. And you can do that with every single program, everything the government does. The government is not allowed to bestow privileges selectively. They're not allowed to do that. It's unconstitutional. They have no implied powers, only explicit powers by the 9th and 10th Amendments. There are no implied powers. Therefore, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, and every other program is unconstitutional because they take from some selectively and give to others preferentially. That is unconstitutional. Now you might say, well, I mean, we need Medicaid, we need Medicare, we need food stamps. Well, then you might as well say we need abortion because they all come from the same root. We don't need Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, or Social Security. Those are all programs that were created by the government that steals from the American people to disperse to some segments of society, specifically to buy votes and to maintain power. As if the government wakes up with a pile of money and then people go to them asking for their just or fair share. That money comes from the people. It is stolen from the people unconstitutionally and bestowed upon others. Let's not blame the people on Medicaid, Medicare, or food stamps very much, because they don't end up with the money. There may be abuse in the system, but I've yet to run into someone on Medicaid who's wealthy. Doesn't happen. Food stamps, they're not rich. That's just the case. Well, if food stamps is a $50 billion industry and Medicaid is a $600 billion industry, where's the money going? Let's go to the rich. That's where it's going. It's going to the Clintons, to the Obamas, to the Bushes. It's going to the large pharmaceutical corporations. It's going to large hospital corporations. It's going to large durable medical equipment corporations. So, if we want to cast blame, let's cast blame where it really needs to be. The programs were created unconstitutionally, specifically to take money from you and me and to give it to those of influence with politicians and bureaucrats. That's why those programs exist. Medicare and Medicaid exist not to help the poor have access or the elderly to have access to health care. It exists, and those of you involved in those systems know it exists. It exists to take the decision-making power from the individual and from the physician and transfer it to a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. or Austin, and we're going to get to the perfidy of Republicans here in a second, and pass it to them so they can distribute it the way they want to distribute it to their friends, and that's where it all goes. There's a lot of details about that. We can discuss that some other time. I want to get into a little. I know I've not said anything particularly inflammatory yet, but I'm about to now. When you look at the country of the United States, there's no place to run. What many people do not realize is that the United States remained a free nation because people fled from government west. Why do you think they fled west? Because it was so great on the East Coast? They fled west to get away from government, to be free. Okay? Well, those days are over, unless you want to go into the water. And I don't think Cuba is very hospitable at the moment. And so, But I was thinking, in Epiphany, interestingly enough, Epiphany is a religious term, but which I'm sure other people can say a lot better than me, but Epiphany, for those not theological sense, means a sudden awareness of a truth that was obvious. In other words, that all the information is there, but suddenly you put it all together and you recognize, it's like you have a piece of jigsaw puzzle, you put it together, now you see the truth. And here's the truth. If we look at, naturally you can't escape violence. Within a state, there is a potential of escape. Now, let's look at this. Really kind of going to quicksand here. Let's look at this politically. Let's pretend you're a political strategist. Let's pretend you're a political strategist, and let's pretend you're a Republican, and you want to win the election. All right. Who votes for me, and who votes for them? You say, well, who votes for them are people on Medicaid, people on food stamps, all the people in public education, all the people in the unions. That's who votes for them. And so, if I'm in charge, as a Republican, if I'm in charge, and let's say, hypothetically, we had a Republican governor, and lieutenant governor, and a Republican Senate and House, hypothetically, that could never possibly happen. Well, let's just say it was hypothetical. Then, if I wanted to build up my base and reduce their base, what would the logical thing be? I starve out the other side. What do? I eliminate Medicaid. I eliminate food stamps. I get rid of public education any way I can. And basically, I eliminate every program that sustains the other side. I'm not heartless or uncharitable, okay? This is just strictly and looking at it in an ivory tower, sterilized environment. I want to hear about starving people and all that. They wouldn't starve. That's another topic. Okay. What happens? Well, all of those individuals without Medicaid, without food stamps, without this and all that, they would leave the state. They go to Oklahoma, they go to New Mexico, they go to Louisiana, go to Arkansas. Sorry, but that's the way it goes. And then the state is solidly Republican, right? It's obvious, isn't it obvious? That's all that needs to be done. So the question arises, why haven't they done it? There has to be a reason. Republicans are stupid, but they can't be that stupid. What is it? Even a stupid person doesn't put his hand in the fire, okay? Well, the obvious answer is this, that the Republicans benefit from those programs as well. The Republicans benefit from food stamps, the Republicans benefit from Medicaid, the Republicans benefit from every other program I mentioned, because that's where the money ends up. The money ends up with the guy who owns HEB. The money ends up with the guy who owns Pfizer and Glaxo. The money ends up with the guy who owns all the apartment complexes. And that's where the money ends up. And many of them are, not all, but many are Republicans. The thing is that there are enough of them around. The Democrats buy votes, okay, with these programs. And Republicans, they buy contributions and other things. They also buy votes as well. And so, I want to get in because I think we need to understand that the Republican Party is a loss, and it's a waste of time. And if you're looking to the Republican Party to change the country, you're kidding yourself. In the 1770s and during the Revolutionary War, there was a significant proportion of members of Parliament that were very sympathetic to the American cause. But it didn't really make any difference because nothing was going to change. The United States was created. The United States became free. The colonists threw off the shackles of an aristocratic dictatorship, not by winning a debate contest, You know, they can win all the debate contests they want, but they're not going to win. They're not going to win in a question where there's power, where you don't have the power. That is why the Second Amendment exists, to protect the First Amendment, because when the Soviets come on shore, you can't pull out the Constitution and says, hey, we got rights. That doesn't work. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights, were to protect the American people from the American government. And so, I just wanted to conclude with that the country was won through violence. It required force to achieve what we gained and have subsequently lost, and that I don't see anything on the horizon, nothing on the horizon at all, which I don't see anyone on the horizon, any individual, any group, or any significant group at the present time. I'm going to finish with this as an example of the corruptive nature of the central government. Marco Rubio, who many consider to be a staunch conservative, had a statement the other day that said that, well, they were coming up with some rules on immigration, and that's not relevant. What he said was, well, that's my idea, our idea, there are 92 other senators with their idea. This is from a so-called conservative. Is it their idea? Is that how it's supposed to work? That a senator with their idea? I thought they were supposed to adhere to the Constitution. I thought they took a note to the Constitution. I thought their ideas needed to conform to the Constitution. But it shows you the way they really think. They really believe it's their idea. I'm going to finish one more thing for those of you who think I'm heartless and whatever. And like my wife, I mentioned at this time. But the thing is this, all the problems that we have, whether it's economics, foreign adventurism, immigration, look what the government has done. The government puts us at odds with everybody. Puts black against white against Hispanic. Pits rich against middle class and poor. Pits one religion against another, pits one region of the country against another, pits man against woman. That's what the government does. Our community, more than any other, understands that we can all get along regardless of our race or religion, and we function perfectly. But in our community, nobody thinks along those lines. Who thinks along those lines when we're dealing with people in our community? It's just another person, and we deal with them based upon the kind of person that they are. That's all. We don't deal with them based upon the color of their skin, or their religion, or anything else. But who puts us one against the other? The government does that, with their idiotic immigration laws and their idiotic rules and regulations. The problems in the United States that we have at the border are created by the United States government and their welfare programs. Because do you and I, do you care? Do I care? Do I care if my neighbor is not a citizen of the United States? I don't care. Why would I care? I mean, who asks those questions? But what do I care about? I care about that there are people here abusing, that taxes have to go up to pay for schools because of the undocumented. That we have to pay their health care costs go up, and all those costs go up. And the reason those costs go up is because of the system that was created by the government. It is the government that created the system. You can abuse Medicaid, but the only way to abuse Medicaid is to have a Medicaid program. You can abuse food stamps, but the only way to abuse food stamps is to have a food stamp program. You can abuse Medicare, but only if you have a Medicare program. Who makes the programs? Don't blame the people when you put $1 in front of them, they pick it up. Don't blame the people who are doing that because if I got $1 in front of me, I'm picking it up also. Or a quarter, or a penny, or whatever it happens to be. So don't blame the people for taking advantage of a system that is made specifically to be taken advantage of for the benefit of the government. Thank you.
Our volunteers will come by the aisles and pick up the cards if you'd like to stretch for a bit. Ourselves with our founding principles, and then take action on those principles. And one gentleman who has been doing that for quite some time is our next speaker, Pastor Ron Smith. Pastor Smith, or I should say Dr. Smith, is a graduate of the Moody Bible Institute, graduated in 1961 and was ordained to the ministry by a Fellowship of Independent Baptists in June of that same year. He spent several years as a missionary in Mexico. He worked for several major corporations as well as owning and managing several others, including a high-rise window cleaning company. At the age of 69, which I find incredible because man doesn't look like he's much over 50, he received his doctorate of biblical studies and in 2002 started and pastored the Church of the King here in McAllen. Pastor Smith will be speaking on the contrast between the city of God and the city of man. Pastor Smith.
Based on a covenant with God called the Mayflower Compact. In the old country, they had paid with their blood to be free from tyrants. Puritan pastor Thomas Hooker wrote the first constitution in the history of mankind for Connecticut in 1639. Thomas Jefferson did not invent the ideas of the Declaration of Independence. They were copied from the Calvinists. The Calvinist Puritans sought to establish a city on a hill based on the Bible. This, and this alone, is what made America great. But now, we're engaged in a spiritual civil war waged by the powers of darkness that hate biblical values. To vote for Obama is to hate God and the America of the Founding Fathers. ChurchoftheKingMcAllen.com, 585-4402. Side with God, get self, and save your soul. I agree with everything Dr. Gelman just said, but I once heard about a Catholic that went to church with a Baptist, and the Baptist preacher took off his watch and laid it up on the pulpit, and the Catholic said, "What does that mean?" He said, "It don't mean nothing." But I will try to stay within my time. I want to present the statism from the biblical point of view. I get calls and people tell me that preachers have no right to get involved in politics. I had a young man say that to me. He said, I'm an evangelical Christian and I'm conservative and I vote like you do probably, but he said, I don't believe you have a right to do what you're doing. I said, oh. I said, can you tell me one prophet in the Bible that did not do what I do? He said, I'll have to study that. Be a good idea. Statism versus the city, statism is the city of man versus the city of God. And when I use the word state, I don't mean the state of Texas or any other state, I mean government. Statists believe that the purpose of government is to control the people and to provide for them. It can come in the form of fascism or Marxism or big brotherism, a nanny state, or the divine right of kings. It can come in many forms, but it's still statism. Sometimes it's socialism. It's been called Big Brother, it's been called the nanny state, and other names. According to the Bible, Romans chapter 13, God ordains government not to provide welfare for the people, but to protect the people from the plunder of life, liberty, and property. And that is the sole purpose of the law, and that is the sole purpose of government. But when the state seeks to save, instead of protect from criminal plunder, it becomes criminal itself. Because it has to plunder some in order to be partial to others. It has become criminal. The first Constitution in the history of mankind was written to protect the people from the government. Do you know when that first Constitution was written? 1639, by a Puritan preacher, Thomas Hooker, for the state of Connecticut. 1639. And at that time, John Locke, the humanist, was only 8 years old. The humanists did not invent this. Freedom. The Bible is a political book. The word political comes from the Greek word polis, and that means city. Ancient empires started as city-states. We get the English word polity from that word, polis, and polity means government. Politics has to do with government, and the Bible is nothing but government. Can you name one prophet in the Bible that did not speak to leaders of government? Politics is all about government, and so is the Bible. Personal government, church government, family government, and civil government. It's nothing but government. The very word kingdom, kingdom of God, is government. I read somewhere that in Abraham's day, Ur of the Chaldees, his hometown, was a socialist city in which there was no private property. The city owned all of the food, it owned all the tools, it owned all the property, and it owned all the souls. And God said to Abraham, get out to a land that I will show you. And so that is statism. As Dr. Gelman said, man's proclivity to control others never changes. That's one thing that never changes, is man's fallen nature, man's lust to control others. And so city-states have been from the earliest times. God said to Abraham, get out of here to a land that I will show you. And so the Bible says that Abraham was looking for a city or a government whose builder and maker is God. That's what we're looking for. In the days of Moses, we see it in Egypt. It was the same thing as Ur of the Chaldees. The Pharaoh owned all the land, all the people, all the food, and all the flocks, and all the souls. And God said, let my people go. Then we see this same thing in the Tower of Babel. It was statism. And they sought to make a name for themselves and to save themselves. And the flood came, and God lied and broke his covenant. And the flood sent another flood. All they'd have to do is save themselves, climb the tower. This made God very angry, and he destroyed it. And confused their languages and brought down the curse of nationalism. And so they couldn't be one world government anymore. We see it again with Nebuchadnezzar. He built an image that represented his state, and he commanded all the people to bow to his image. But the 3 Hebrew children wouldn't bend, they wouldn't bow, and they wouldn't burn. That's what we need to do. We see it again, we see statism again when Augustus Caesar said this. Believe it or not, before Jesus was born, Augustus Caesar had brought worldwide peace through war. And he said, there's no other name under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved but the name Caesar. So every religion in the world, except the Bible, ends up making the government God. Putting the government above God's law. Putting the government over God. It becomes a substitute for God. And we see it with the rulers of Jerusalem when they said, we have no king but Jesus. I mean, no, they didn't say that. They said, we have no king but Caesar. That's statism. Caesar was a beast, and statism is the mark of the beast. Now, legalism leads to statism. Statism tries to save with laws like banning guns, Obamacare, and welfare. Statism violates the First Amendment by forcing Catholics, for example, to accept abortion and gay marriage. Statism does not tolerate the Ten Commandments. It's competition for them. The state can lie, the state can steal, the state can kill, because the state is Lord over God's law. And Christians support it. That's the mark of the beast. When the government attempts to save people by its laws, it becomes a god, an antichrist. God's law, and any law, is negative. It seeks to protect the people by telling them what we can't do, but it cannot save. It can only protect. It can only protect the people from the plunder of what? Life, liberty, and property. That is the sole function of government. That's the sole function of law. And the Declaration of Independence says whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends of protecting life, liberty, and property, it's the right of the people to alter such government and to institute a new government. These are self-evident. The ruler, according to the Bible, is God's minister of justice for that purpose, and that purpose alone, and not as a savior. But when he steals from some to give to others, he has broken both God's law and the Constitution. The only reason for government is because Adam fell. There would be no criminals if Adam hadn't fell, if Adam hadn't fallen. The government is to be condemned when it becomes more than law, when it's made into a savior. The Democrats have been leading the Republicans toward more and more statism, and both parties are guilty. And that's why liberals call themselves progressives. They are progressing toward more and more statism by means of dismantling the Constitution and opposing God's law. And for that reason alone, the Supreme Court kicked God out of government in 1948 with Chief Justice Black, and Christians yawned. And for that reason alone, for the purpose of statism, the court kicked God out of public education in 1963, and Christians ignored it. And for that reason alone, the court legalized abortion in 1973 for the purpose of statism, for the purpose of controlling people. Statists like President Obama not only support abortion and gay marriage, they want laws that force us to support those things. What then shall free and lawful people do? Well, let's do what our founding fathers did. What do you say? What do you say? Huh? Do I hear a hey, hey? During the American War of Independence, preachers were called the Black Robed Regiment. They preached this stuff from the pulpits on Sundays. They preached righteous politics. And we've got to go back to the future with the faith of the fathers to restore America. We have a solemn duty to teach the people about justice in government. What is justice? God's law defines it. In Leviticus 19:50. It says, "You shall not do injustice in judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor." I had somebody walk out on me one time. I'm not finished reading that verse. It actually says that. You shall not be partial to the poor. You shall. Can we say it together? You shall not be partial to the poor, nor to the mighty. That's equal justice. That's equal justice. That's where that balance is balanced. And we must not be partial to the poor. Nowadays, the average person thinks it's righteous and good to be partial to the poor. It's against God's law. Yes, we want to help the poor. But we don't want to steal from his pocket to pay him. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not steal. Karl Marx said this. Well, Rushdoony quoted, R.J. Rushdoony quoted Karl Marx, quoted this. He said, Karl Marx did not believe in private property. He clearly saw the implications of the Ten Commandments, and therefore he hated them. He saw that property is power. And whoever controls property has liberty. And whoever surrenders power over property surrenders liberty. If civil government is given power over property, then that government becomes free from the control of its citizens and controls them instead. Today, the state has extensive controls over property and taxes. There's inheritance tax and income tax, and there's state-controlled education and centralization of credit in the hands of the state. There's control over capital, labor, and farming. Is it any wonder that the family is breaking down and the federal government is growing in power? They're progressing. The God-given economic foundation of the family is being destroyed because God's law is despised. There is no combating the Marxist system without a return to biblical faith. Do I hear a? Power and authority belong to the state, and therefore the allegiance of the children is to the state. Their future rests with the state, and therefore it's the state they obey, and the state they seek to please. The state is God. The result, totalitarianism. It's progressing more and more. Statists think of God's commandments as oppressive restrictions. They hate God's law. And they separate the secular from the sacred. They use that as an excuse to get rid of God's law. They not only violate the Constitution, they ban the Ten Commandments. Psalm 2 says this. Very interesting psalm. Read it when you get a chance. It says, why do the nations rage, and the peoples imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast their cords from us. And what are their bands? God's law. To them, God's law is oppressive and binding. They hate it, and they gather together and say, let us break their bands asunder and cast their cords from us. But he that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord will have them in derision. That means he'll make fun of them. So it is, that psalm ends by saying, learn from this, you rulers. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and ye perish from the way, when his wrath is kindled by the little. May God save America. May God bless America. Somebody said to me today, do you think there's any future for America? Maybe it's going to take a nuclear war to wake us up. I said, well, World War II didn't help. The Great Depression didn't help. The Great Awakening helped. But what prepared it was the Puritans who plowed the ground. They broke up the fallow ground, as the old prophet says in the Old Testament. Break up your fallow ground, for it's time to seek the Lord till he come and rain righteousness upon you. In the Great Awakening of 1742, it was the divine sovereign act of God that woke the people up. That's what we need to pray for. And as long, we're having the National Day of Prayer Thursday. If they gave me a chance to speak, and I don't think I'm on the docket, I would say this. You can cry out to God about abortion and gay marriage till you're purple in the face. But until we as Christians confess the sin of supporting statism, God will continue to visit us with monsters like we have in power now. If my people, which are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray and seek your face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, will forgive their sin, and will heal their land. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor Smith. Once again, I'd like volunteers to come and collect question cards that you may have. While you're going to take and stretch a little bit.
Also,
And while you're doing that, I'd
right
like to
here, asking the question out.
share with you one of my favorite philosophers is Marcus Aurelius Cicero, who was a great defender of the Roman Republic, wrote around 54 BC. He lived at the time of Mark Antony, Cleopatra. And I bring this up because in one of his writings, his friends asked him to talk about something. And he said, well, as long as we agreed to discuss something, let us first define what it actually is. Because unless we're talking about the same thing, we'll never reach an understanding. I was happy that Pastor Smith brought up the definition of certain words, because one night we were having coffee, and after you had left, some of your parishioners came by and asked about this event. We told them about it, and one woman looked at me and said, "You're going to be talking about politics." I said, "No, we're going to be talking about principles." But it got me thinking, and I went home thinking of Cicero, which I tend to do a lot. I went home, got my dictionary, and I looked up the definition of politics. My dictionary defined politics as the set of principles that are used to govern a nation, or a state, or an organization. I guess maybe I owe terminology, maybe we are talking about politics, but in the form of the principles that it should be based on. Now, our last speaker this evening is Rabbi Stephen Rosenberg. Rabbi Rosenberg is a seventh-generation rabbi. He holds degrees in speech, communications, Jewish law, and pastoral counseling. Besides being a congregational rabbi, he has also been a talk show host and a producer, as well as a speaker on the subject of ethics and helping to find the potential in each other. I've had the privilege of getting to know Rabbi Steve over the past several years. Before he comes to the podium, I just want to take a moment to share a personal observation. As you know, rabbi means teacher. And this man has taught me many things over the last couple of years, many things of value that I appreciate greatly. Also, this past Easter, I was confirmed in the Catholic faith, and Father Louis is my priest. It is rare that we get an opportunity to be in the presence of two people that we admire and respect greatly. But how often does a guy get to be on the stage with his priest and his rabbi at the same time? This is a moment of pure ecumenical enjoyment. Rabbi Rosenberg will be speaking on the very origin of law.
Brilliant, sir. Thank you so much. Before we get started, I still have a picture in my office of those of you who have led at one time at a restaurant, Hot Box. And I still have that picture of you with the Jewish star on the curtain, the bagels. So he's, I And maybe you're a rabbi, you're my day man. Both of you are a tough act to follow, so now they have the rabbi to bring it on home. I want to start with this quote from James Madison. We have staked the whole future of American civilization not upon the power of government, far from it. We have staked the future of all of our political institutions upon the capacity of each and all of us to govern ourselves, to control ourselves, to sustain ourselves according to the Ten Commandments of God. I would like to juxtapose that to a recent study that came out not too long ago, where junior high and high school teachers asked students, where do some of these laws come from? Don't steal, don't murder. What's the origin of that? Over 30% said the internet. That's where we are today. And we've had these two distinguished men that have said some amazing things tonight, and I agree with all of them. There was a slide up here that we had just a little while ago. If you could put it back up, that would be really nice, from Leviticus, about the idea that we don't give any homage to either side. We don't give more credence to the poor or to the rich. You know, we talk about these symbols about, well, they really shouldn't be around. The scales of justice, justice is blind, comes from that statement that the poor nor the rich get anything except equal treatment. We're all blind before the law. That's a biblical statement. The founding fathers knew that our rights come from our Creator. And Dr. Gelman spoke about it before, and I'd like just to reiterate this. Listen to these words. Behold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. It's important that we understand that the founding fathers knew that these rights were not created by the Constitution. They believed they existed from God. And today, we live in a world that cynicism is the order of the day. How many of you remember a few years ago Chief Justice Roy Moore, who, by the way, he's Chief Justice again. 9 years later, he ran again and won. But in 2003, Chief Justice Moore had a 5,300-pound granite monument of the Ten Commandments in the court rotunda of the state Supreme Court in Alabama. And at that time, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in Atlanta ordered him to remove him. And he didn't. The U.S. Supreme Court ordered him, they rejected the appeal from Chief Justice Moore and held with a ruling from the circuit court. And he still refused to remove it. And critics of the monument claimed that it violated the establishment of religion. It said the First Amendment, it violated the First Amendment. Well, first of all, the First Amendment says that Congress really should make no law establishing a religion. Congress didn't do anything. This was a judge that saw that the origin of law which were the Ten Commandments, and put it in a place people could see it. Same way it is in the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court. Representation of the Ten Commandments that exist there. And also a representation of Moses as the lawgiver. But we live in a world today where that thought of the origin of law is lost. And when it's lost, when we put men and women and humankind above the law, we take God out of the equation, we get Nazism, we get Stalinism, we get the Holocaust. We get a place where the killing of people are okay because the government says so. We get a place where laws may be legal, but not moral. As was mentioned here before, everything in Nazi Germany was passed by law. Adolf Hitler didn't have a coup. Adolf Hitler was the legally elected Chancellor of Germany. There was nothing illegal about it. It's just that in this particular case, God was out of the equation. And a country became passing laws that were not moral. If we let our children understand that, gee, these laws must come from the internet, and that's where we go with this, what's going to happen in 10 years, in 20 years, in 50 years? Will we have a church of Google? Will we praise the divine consciousness of the World Wide Web? It sounds funny, but it's not far-fetched. We need to go back and see the movie 1984. George Orwell warned us what would happen when Big Brother becomes everything. When we become a country where we put ourselves above God, that's what happens. Our sages teach us that when we put ourselves above God, we become God. We end up worshiping ourselves. God help us. We need to be in a place where we would have the courage of someone like Judge Moore said these are things that people should see. He wasn't trying to convert anybody. He said this is the origin of these laws. When our tradition states in Hebrew, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, justice, justice, you shall pursue. These are things that were brought down to our era. The Bible is the origin of laws about property, about life and death, about monetary compensation. Monetary compensation, and you thought in the 20th century, that's when we came up with the idea of ambulance chasers and lawyers, and all that kind of stuff. In the Bible, you probably have heard this quote, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a leg for a leg, an arm for an arm. It was translated by the rabbis as understanding that this is nuts. As Tevye said in Fiddler on the Roof, if we went by the principle, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, the entire world would be blind and toothless. There's a lot of wisdom there. What the rabbis interpreted that was that if I punch your eye out, and you're a blacksmith, that eye is worth a lot of money. That eye is your livelihood. That I have to compensate you for the loss of that eye because it impacts your livelihood. That in the Bible, we came up with the idea of monetary compensation. Lawsuits didn't start in the 20th and 19th century. It goes way, way back. We understand that the wisdom that is in the text we call the Bible, no matter whether you're Jewish or Christian, it doesn't matter. It's the wisdom of the ages speaks to us, and the founders of our country understood the wisdom. James Madison understood that if they could create a country to get off of the yoke, a new country, off the back, and get the King of England off their back, to create a country where they would be influenced and guided by these laws, not to put them over there. Where in the Constitution does it say there needs to be a separation of church and state? Not in my Constitution I've read. They were guided by these. These principles were so important to them. It's what founded our republic. I wonder today if we had the debate that we were going to now start all over again with money. We were going to have a debate about whether "In God We Trust" should be on our coinage. How many of you think Congress would actually pass that? Or if we had a debate about whether we should have the idea of God and the Pledge of Allegiance today, if we were redoing it again, would we hear a vocal chorus to have it removed? We live in a world where it gets pretty dangerous. We start to think that we can take out God's law. It is so superimposed in our country. The founding fathers did not question the fact that we were given these rights by God. And they looked as a body, a governing body, to create a constitution, not to create rights, but to administer the rights that were given to them by God. And that's what we have forgotten. That if there's nothing above us, God help us. You know, that's why we wear this. We wear a kippah, Jews do on our heads, to remind us there's something above us. That we're not it. Because, let me leave you with this. If God says you shall not murder, that law is immutable. It's what it is. If man says you shall not murder, it's changeable. What kind of country do we want to live in? Laws that can be changed, such as, well, you can murder on Tuesday and Wednesday, but not on Thursday, before noon. That's nuts. We live in a world where there are absolutes. We live in a world that we understand that murder is wrong because it's contrary to the law of God. We understand that stealing is wrong because it's contrary to the laws of God. We live in a world today, unfortunately, and we talk about this a lot, where look at what's afflicting our schools. An epidemic of things like bullying. Well, you know what? This is what happens when you take God out of the classroom. Who is the arbiter of that if you can't say, you know what? This is something that God says, love your neighbor as yourself. We can't say that in school. When we take something bigger than ourselves out of the equation, that's what we get. We get humankind with nothing more than humankind. How many of you, raise your hand, know a child who's been bullied? How many of you knew a child who was bullied? How many of you, this is amazing. And, you know, schools don't deal with this well. Because we've taken the ultimate arbiter of law out of the equation. If I can't say to students, love your neighbor as yourself, that's not a suggestion, that's a commandment from your God. Otherwise, well, you know, just be nicer on the playground. Why? Because it's a good thing to do. Very different. A very different statement. So perhaps you'd be wise to listen to the words of James Madison. Understand that law comes from God. The 10 Commandments were imbued in us. It is inextricably part of the fabric of our law. I hope that in the future, you listen to these two very, very bright and wonderful people who said some wonderful things tonight. Maybe we can all do our part. Maybe that next survey that comes out, it won't be 30% of kids think that those laws come from the internet. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi Steve. We'd like to take just a few minute break while we get the question cards. We're going to extend the evening a little bit to 8:15. We will try to get as many questions in as we can. So if you want to get up and stretch, have a cup of coffee or something to drink, and we'll start the question and answer period in about 5 minutes.